the PNC Roundtable.
Hello, this is Rick DeVore, Regional President of PNC Bank, and thank you for listening to PNC Roundtable, celebrating its 5th year. It's on this show that we tackle some of the region's top issues with people who truly make a difference in our region. Welcome to the PNC Roundtable. I'm PNC Regional President Rick DeVore. My co-host, Paul W. Smith, is on the road with the Pure Michigan Tour, but he'll be back for the next show. In honor of our 5th anniversary of the PNC Roundtable, we have a very, very special guest with us today, Michigan's 48th Governor, the Honorable Rick Snyder. Governor, thanks for joining us today in PNC Roundtable.
It's great to be with you, Rick. It's like the Rick and Rick show, I guess.
Yes, it is. In fact, I used that line one time at Eastern Michigan when I first came back to Michigan. I don't think people were getting it because they all knew who you were, but they weren't sure who I was. I think that was some Washtenaw County Awards, the black tie event. I think it's the first time I met you, actually. But obviously, there's been a lot going on. I did attend your State of the State address, and I was thankful there wasn't a lot of snow or bad weather for that. But a lot has happened since then, and I was just curious if we could start off with you giving us kind of an update on your view of the State of the State today.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. If you look at, we're the comeback state in the United States, and we should be proud of that. We still have a lot more work to be done. But if you step back and look at, our low point was in 2009. And if you take a number of different measures, unemployment, for example, the unemployment rate, it was at 14.2%. It's at 8.5% today. That's almost 6 percentage points down. In terms of number of private sector jobs, it's about 200,000 private sector jobs have been created, which is fabulous. Another big one, though, is income levels, personal income in our state. It had really gone down in our state. In comparison to other states, we had dropped dramatically to be 40 out of the 50 states. But the last 2 years, we've been growing faster than the national average in terms of income levels. A big one that is critically important is just population. We're the only state that lost population in the year from 2000 to 2010. We're the only state in the nation, and we're growing again in terms of population. So those are all good things, but it's continuing to happen. One thing I would add to this is just this last month or so, Site Selection Magazine came out and said we're number 4 in business expansions in the United States. That's great, but let's keep going. This isn't good enough. Let's do more.
I would agree, and it's nice to see outsiders, like you just mentioned, Site Selection Magazine, but also the rating agencies have taken notice as well, correct?
Yes, they have. Our bond ratings have gone up. And that's very important because it affects our borrowing costs, and it's a big perception when businesses look to a state. That's one of the key measures they look at is how strong is that state. And that's because we've done such a good job of balancing the budget the last couple of years and putting money in the rainy day fund and being financially responsible as a state government.
You know, I've mentioned that when I've gone back to headquarters. Not only there's one thing about balancing the budget, but there's another to do what you just said, which is put money away in the rainy day fund, and that sometimes I think taxpayers don't realize this is to their benefit because it reduces the borrowing costs. And since you're very fond of saying that's your customers, yeah, and you really are coming through for your customers. So I think that's really exciting. I was wondering, I know lately there's been a lot of conversation about education all the way from pre-K up to college level, but I was wondering if we could just kind of get an update on not just early childhood, but your view of public education right now in the state.
Sure. I think it's an exciting time. It's a challenging time, but we're making a lot of progress. And it's about working with a lot of great teachers and administrators. We just had an education summit statewide just this last week or so, and that was a follow-up to an economic development summit. Because one of the things we really have an opportunity to do is get the business sector working better with the education sector. Because you have to ask the question, what's the point of getting an education? I say there are two. One is to find a career, and the other one is self-enrichment. The other thing we always need to remember is we never should tell anyone what they should study or what they should go into, but provide better information. So one thing we have is we have an opportunity to do a better job of connecting the supply and demand of talent, where the jobs are with the private sector, with the education sector, and what fields are open. Because right now we have over 60,000 open jobs in Michigan that we're not filling, and they're great jobs. And so I think the dialogue we're having now is very good because it's how do we partner better together.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of outcomes, I heard this last week from Dan Gilbert. They have open jobs. We hear it from a lot of our customers like Roush Engineering. They have open engineering jobs, and it really does make your heart sink. But I really think this linkage is just so important. Our view at PNC is obviously we need better educated borrowers and depositors, but also better trained employees. So it's really worth making the investment. Can we talk a little bit about the EAA? And there's been, I feel when I travel, sometimes misunderstanding of that and what we're trying to accomplish and so forth.
Sure, I'm happy to, because the EAA, the Educational Achievement Authority, is a very exciting opportunity for all of us. And what it focused on are persistently failing schools, and we have too many of those in Michigan. And so just this last school year, 15 schools, all within the city of Detroit, went into the EAA that were on this list of persistently failing schools. So something needed to be done. And so what it is a new innovative way of looking at it, where they're doing student-centered learning, which is a great model. It's somewhat like Montessori in terms of how you learn about things, but it's really allowing the students to take more ownership of their education and to master levels, where they really understand the information, I think, in a great fashion. It also leverages technology well in terms of how we can look towards the future, because a lot of young people, they're looking to use technology more. That they're living on their phone already, right. Many kids. And so how do we integrate that? So it's about creating this new environment of innovation for schools that were extremely challenged, and the focus is really about student growth. And when I say student growth, it's allowing each individual student to grow at least a year worth of learning each and every year. So it's not asking them to compete against other districts or other students in other schools, but how can they make sure they're growing? And the EAA is focused on that, and the early results look very good.
What I was really taken with when we did the tour, I was on the tour with you with the EAA schools, was, this is my term, but almost like swim lanes, like each curriculum. In other words, in the past, I think for the listeners, you got moved along by grade, sometimes maybe within that grade, say science, you weren't ready to move, but you got moved anyway. And it seemed like that really empowered the students. They were really excited about that, about their pace. And swim lanes probably isn't the proper term, but it was an analogy for me.
No, it's a good way to look at it, because it gets back to that student-centered learning. So, yeah, the traditional grades aren't there. They master levels. And it was funny, when I walked in, I forgot and asked the grade question. They corrected me right away. They said, no, we do levels here. And the nice part is the concept of failing isn't there. It's all about mastering a level. And you can go faster or slower based on how good you are in a particular subject. So for the kids that can go even faster, they can move along. Mm-hmm. For people that need more help, that's where it can be identified. So a teacher can be that coach to help them get through those difficult questions and issues. And it was great. As you get towards the end of mastering a level, quite often those kids will end up being mentors to the kids that are still earlier in the process. Right. And if you think about it, the best way to learn material quite often is when you're actually part of teaching it to someone else.
Well, and to your point, they really seemed like they were owning the outcomes. They felt it was their school, their class. When we walked around, it was interesting because I would ask the kids about, what's the big difference? And almost all of them said, well, there's also not as much fighting. And I think that's part of the owning the environment and so forth. I got excited listening to them.
I thought it was great. I wished I could have gone back to school. I mean, that seemed like a great environment to go to. And I think if you look at, this is just the first year. So you always have some startup issues or challenges when you start something new. And so you have to visualize it in 2 or 3 years from now when they get fully operating the way you'd want and learn more as they put in these systems. It's going to be really exciting. And the goal there is to help these schools potentially have it to go to a few other places, but it's not to be too many places in Michigan, the EAA. It's going to be really a place of innovation, though, where I hope traditional school districts take on a lot of the same methods and ideas that they are, and they trade ideas back and forth.
Right.
So they can support one another with innovative ways to improve education.
Well, it seems that there's a connection all the way up to the college level, and I know that you were the classic overachiever in multiple degrees in a very short period of time. But one thing that you've been consistently talking about is why not give kids that take advanced placement in high school already college credit, i.e. some of these kids could actually enter college maybe almost a sophomore. And that would really reduce some financial burden, again, getting back to this kind of a swim lanes thing if they've mastered that. Could you maybe expand a little bit on what your thoughts are there on that?
Oh, yeah, it's a huge opportunity. Yeah, personally, it's very personal to me because actually I wanted to start college when I was a sophomore in high school, and my mom told me I couldn't go until I could drive. So that's partially where the nerd concept came from. But if you look at it, I think we should be calling our educational system P20, for prenatal through lifelong learning. And it's fine to have separate institutions at separate levels, but we need to make it much more seamless, to make it easy to transfer credits, to move between these different institutions, and make it simple. And one bill I was really proud to sign last year was a bill about dual enrollment, to really encourage what you're talking about, Rick, to say if someone could earn a year of college while they're still in high school, college is too expensive. But wouldn't that be the greatest savings you could have? Is if you get 1 year done, you've got a 25% savings right there,
right,
in addition to having a whole year extra to look at in terms of your life.
No, it's really true, and I know for me that from a personal experience, this is exactly what happened to me. I was a newlywed, and I was going to get my master's, and I went to one school, and they said, hey, this is great. You can pass out of all these classes because you came here undergrad, but you got to replace them with higher level classes. And I thought, wait a minute, whereas Wayne State said, no, we just need this many credits, and quite honestly, it became a financial decision. But it was, congratulations, now you get to take harder classes than your peers. Almost like a disincentive, right? But a lot going on in education, and I was wondering, it seems like, from an immigration standpoint, it's somewhat linked to that too, and I was wondering if you could share with the listeners a little bit about this issue of children going to college, and then unfortunately we lose them, even though, to your earlier point, there were these jobs that were open.
Yeah, one of the things, we really do need immigration reform in our country, and I feel strongly about that because that's what made our country great. We tend to forget that here in Michigan, but if all you have to do is go around, think of companies like Meyer.
Right.
That was by a Dutch immigrant. Dow, most people don't realize that was a Canadian immigrant. Dow was from Canada.
I did not know that.
So you've got cases here of that's how we made our state great, and now we have adopted them as Michigan companies,
right,
where immigrants did that. So we have this phenomenon now where we get all these foreign students coming to our state, particularly in science, math, engineering fields. They're getting PhDs, they're getting master's degrees. We educate them, we give them the best education in the world, and then we tell them to get out.
Right.
That's dumb. Is the only way you can describe that, because if you look at it, and I did a lot of startup companies, they're net job creators. Mm-hmm. They would go into young companies or companies that have this hiring need. They would allow them to create more jobs. So it would bring more jobs to all Michiganders if we could do immigration reform where we would allow people, particularly with advanced degrees in STEM, science, technology, engineering,
right,
and math, give them a green card. Go through the background checks, but if they pass, let them stay here and create jobs.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. We and I think sometimes the same people that are against that are wondering why a lot of this goes offshore.
Yeah. Well, one other fun one, because we're talking about STEM in that regard, is I had the experience a couple weeks ago, and it was a blast. I thought it was a wonderful experience. I went to the state championship for FIRST Robotics, which are these high school teams that are literally building robots, and they compete against one another. And it was a fabulous experience to see these young people. It was like going to a rock concert. It was at Eastern's Arena Convocation Center, and it's like they're competing, but their parents are there, their mentors. They get all these companies sponsoring them to build these products. They're learning math, physics, all these fields by applying it in robotics. And Michigan's the leader in terms of the most teams from any one state is from Michigan, but I think that's something we should really be increasing. That's when we have 200 teams now. I'd love to see us get to 300-400 teams in our state, because it really brings all those skill sets together for our high school students to say, here's a great field in skilled trades or university-level engineering.
It doesn't have to be just university level.
No, we need to do much better with skilled tradespeople in our state. There's a huge opportunity there, and that's something that I ask parents to really think about, because in some ways we've sort of created too much of this thing that sort of forcing kids to say you have to go to university, where you can make a great life, you can have a fabulous career, very proud career in a skilled trade field. We need to emphasize that. So that's important what our intermediate school districts and our community colleges are doing. We just did that last week in the Capitol, and it was fabulous. They had everything from underwater welding to CNC machining to medical fields, culinary arts. They were cooking there. So if you looked at all those different fields you can do in terms of the trades, it's exciting, and let's emphasize those because there are open jobs there today.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you bring that up, because I think sometimes we as parents think that it has to be college. And I think I heard a great story with Dow Chemical hooking up with Delta Community College. They realized they didn't really have anybody that could run their boilers and some of their systems. And they were really at wit's end, and they developed, I guess, at Delta Community College, a curriculum to train people how to basically run some of the huge machinery in Midland.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great way to partner with, to your point earlier, fill in a need with a nice, a good community college. And I think Dow was a great partner in that example.
Yeah, no, it's a great opportunity. And the other part people need to realize, if you go into a skilled trade like that, you can always continue on. And they're actually designing the systems better to do that now, to say, hey, if you enjoy it that much and you want to go back, potentially you can get your bachelor's degree in engineering or whatever field. But the skilled trades are exciting. One of my favorite stories was last year I went to this welding program up in Cadillac, and they were having sixth grade girls come in. Sixth grade girls to show them about welding. And it was wonderful. So I went up to these sixth grade girls, and they had the welding mask on, they had the apron on, the gloves, the whole thing. So they lifted up their masks, and I said, how do you like this? They go, this is awesome. And they were there welding little Michigans to take home to their parents to show what they could do. And that's the kind of exposure to just a wonderful field that we would encourage. And that was back to that earlier point about getting the business community to go in more to the schools, not just high schools, but middle schools, elementary schools, and offer to do a tour or have someone come in and speak. I mean, think about it from the banking field. To actually have them a chance to really understand what's involved and things that they may not all go into it, but it's going to make them a more informed decision maker.
No, it is, and we do, in-school banking, and we have a passion around, you talk about literacy, and you wonder sometimes why people would go to a payday lender. Well, many times they're embarrassed because they know they need the money, and they sign this disclosure form, and you say, why would you ever do that? Well, if you can't read, you may be embarrassed, you need the money, and you just didn't realize you just signed something that's maybe one tick below usury, right?
Yeah.
And so I think literacy takes a lot of different forms, but financial literacy is just as important as literacy.
Yeah, we need to keep that up. So I appreciate what PNC is doing with that, and good programs like Junior Achievement and things like that are good opportunities. But it's helping on all those skills, because I know you guys are doing a great job with the early childhood. Big supporter of that.
Well, we actually do financial literacy with early childhood, which I know some people might be surprised, but our program for me, for you, for later, money to acquire things, of course, but money to share and then money to save. Sharing meaning, sharing with maybe another person in need, if you will. So I think those habits are very important, positive habits early.
Yeah. No, my mother used to do that with me. The funny part is my dad was good at math and my mother was somewhat challenged. So even when I was like 4 or 5 years old, these are in the old days when people hand wrote out the checks in restaurants.
Yep.
She'd always hand me the check and say, okay, dear, honey, you check the check. And so I'd do all the math on the check and figure out the tip. And the interesting part, about 1 out of 10 times, I'd catch a math error. And my mother thought that was very humorous, that, okay, here's the little kid. Yeah. Then I'd have people at the surrounding tables want to hand me their check so I could check the math, too.
That's putting you on the spot there. Must have prepared you for being governor when you get thrown a question you weren't expecting, maybe.
Yeah, well, it was good practice. But nowadays it's all computerized. But back then, there was a lot of math challenges.
Well, here we are in the Fisher Building, and obviously we probably need to talk about your view. I know it's early with Kevin Orr, and seems like a great pick. I've gotten a lot of compliments from our Washington and Pittsburgh-based folks who know Jones Day and know of him. But I know it's a little bit early, but if you could give us your assessment of how he's doing at this point.
Well, I think he's off to a very strong start. It's not just Kevin, it's the people that are in the community, that people seem to be focused on solving problems, and that's what we need to do. So Kevin, I think, is playing a good role, but it's important. I appreciate the mayor being supportive, the city council people, the community in general, that if you think about it, we need to solve these problems. And I think in many cases, people in Detroit simply want better services, and they want to solve these long-term financial issues, because don't we all want to grow to the city of Detroit? I think we all agree the long-term solution has to be growth here.
Right.
And let's not talk about our differences. Let's talk about how we can work together to achieve that outcome.
I'll tell you, it just seems like, not being as intimately involved as you are with it, I've been pleasantly surprised that seemed like not a lot of notoriety after a lot of conversation to get there. Now it seems to be going, knock on wood, very smoothly. I'm really somewhat surprised, but very delighted in that. Is that your feel as well?
No, it's been very positive in terms of how it's been going. What I would say is I would expect that there could be challenging moments because there are tough decisions that need to be made still.
Right.
So we're still early in this process. But the point is the decision's there. Kevin's there. I think he's a great individual with a great background to work in a collaborative fashion with the mayor and city council. So let's continue on that path. And let's take on these tough issues. And let's try to let's do them in the next 16, 17 months.
Right.
And get it behind us. Because, again, the goal there, my view is you don't want an emergency manager there too long. Get in, get the hard work done, get the transition in place, and get back on a path of growth.
Right, and turn it over to the folks to continue to govern after that. We've been, obviously, conversations in the state about the roads. You and I were kidding before I was telling you my story of people sleeping in my car and being able to see when it was Michigan or hear when it was Michigan. I said that for my son who watches all these shows from Arizona, so he always critiques me. He's a teacher, by the way. But that's actually a true story. And the roads, and if we could touch on that and also maybe touch on some of these insurance issues, and
sure,
if we could.
Yeah, we need to make progress on our roads, and we need to invest more in our roads. I mean, I've been around Michigan, and I've asked this from 2009 when I started campaigning. Does anyone like the roads in Michigan? No one does.
Right.
And the point is, though, is no one likes the roads, but then if we don't like them, shouldn't we do something about it? And that requires an investment, which is asking for more revenue, which is a very difficult question politically.
Right.
But if you stop and look at it, this is a case where it's pay so much on a periodic basis or get a huge bill later. So we're talking about roughly $1.2 billion over the next 10 years. If we don't make that investment, the bill at the end of that 10-year period would be over $25 billion. And in the meantime, our roads would have just kept on going downhill, and you think they're bad now. You haven't seen anything what they'd be like in 10 years if we don't start investing more in our roads. So that's the first part. The second one is we pay more in auto repair costs than the surrounding states by about $80 per vehicle.
Wheel alignment.
Yeah, because of wheel alignment, those famous bumps you were talking about, that if you take that into account, that could offset a whole bunch of the costs. If we could save that $80 by having better roads, it would create a lot of jobs, over 10,000 jobs in our state, which helps our whole economy raise up and do better. And it would save probably nearly 100 lives a year by having safer roads in terms of the safety features. So if you lay those up, the way I describe it is there are 4 layers of really good reasons. And if we were sitting around a kitchen table as a family, we'd figure out how to tighten our belt just a little bit more so we can make that payment now instead of having it later. The best analogy, it's like, do you change the oil in your car or do you wait for an engine rebuild? You make that oil change because you don't want that huge bill later. This is the same thing.
Well, how do you, as governor, usher Lansing through that? I mean, it somewhat reminds me of some other issues, for instance, group homes. It seems like people are for them until they realize, oh, wait a minute, not next door to me, though, right? And this is clearly an investment. You are a CPA and an attorney and so forth. I, as a banker, understand this long-term investment. How do you balance that, though, with Lansing that sometimes has a 2-year time horizon, kind of like U.S. Congress?
Yeah, well, that is the problem. I mean, there's asking for more revenue, and the political world tends to be extremely short-sighted in terms of what's in the next year or 2 years.
Right.
But this is something where that's what could distinguish Michigan in our future, because we're the comeback state. But to keep it going, we need to show that we're building for our future, that we want this great state again. Our best days are ahead of us, and then part of it's making these longer-term investments and having them pay off. So we just need to keep the discussion going. The positive part that seems to be going on is much of the discussion now isn't we don't need to do anything. It's like, what is the right solution?
Right.
And so I'm very open-minded about solutions. I think we put a good proposal out there that gets the $1.2 billion number. But what I would say is I'm mainly concerned about achieving that outcome. If people have other ideas and options, that's why I encourage the legislators from both the House, the Senate, Democrats and Republicans to all throw different ideas on the table.
Right.
And so I'm hoping I would encourage them to put those ideas out, and I hope citizens are asking them to put them out on the table.
Well, it's obvious that you now have gotten past yes, there is a problem. It does seem to run at odds with Pure Michigan, because how can people enjoy Pure Michigan if they're bouncing all the way there, or in the shop? Nothing worse than being in an auto shop on your vacation, right? So it does seem to be at odds at that. But I think you're right. It's an investment that has to be made kind of the classic pay me now, pay me later, right? Later is much more expensive than now.
And the other part is, as I'd mentioned, Rick, is this is for roads and bridges primarily, but this would help with mass transit, it would help with rail, it would help with harbors and some of our, the dredging-related issues.
Right.
This is more transportation resources, and we need to make them in our roads and bridges, but we also have broader needs that are important to our long-term growth.
Mm-hmm. We hear consistently, if we could go to the insurance question, I know I've talked to many folks that are real estate developers in Midtown and downtown, and one of the issues that our young people, the 20 to 30, have is their car insurance is probably the size of a mortgage payment. Part of that may be attributed to no fault, but could you walk the listeners through maybe a little bit of I've heard you compare our insurance rates to other states, and if you could walk through that.
Yeah, Michigan's too high. We're 8th highest in the country. And we have 3 of the top 10 cities that are the most expensive. Detroit, but it might surprise you that Novi and Muskegon are the other 2.
Yeah, the Novi one really surprised me.
So you have a case where we're too expensive. So one of the issues is our car insurance is too expensive. The other problem we have is because it's gotten so expensive, about 20% of our motorists are uninsured. They simply are not buying insurance, which actually you're required to buy insurance.
Right.
So then you're creating a much more difficult environment for everyone by having all these motorists out there without any insurance. So we do need to make some reforms. And there's a whole series of reforms that need to happen. A couple things we're working on already is the whole issue of insurance fraud. That's an important piece. Everyone's supporting that, it seems like. Then the other one is the no-fault medical piece, the catastrophic claims piece. So that's a situation that's gotten extremely expensive. You can watch the rates go up. They've gone up dramatically in the last few years, and there are 2 or 3 issues that need to be solved there. The first thing is the reforms we're proposing would bring down that cost by would bring it down by $125 per car. And that would actually be in the legislation to say it will be $125 less than what it has been. For year 1 at least. And then the experience shows it actually can go higher in terms of better savings if you look at other analogies. So that's one issue that needs to get resolved. The challenges are 2 or 3-fold. Some of the reforms that need to happen is, the biggest one is the medical community right now is charging a lot more for auto health-related claims than they do for your normal health insurance claims. They're charging, in some cases, 2 or 3 times as much money as you would if you go in and do it under your normal health insurance or someone's on Medicaid or Medicare. We need to manage those costs and bring down that cost structure because it should be in line with what you'd pay for other insurance or other costs. So that's part of it. Then there's an issue about the cap, about capping these costs, and that's probably the most controversial because there's an issue about putting $1 million cap in. To give you an idea, we're number 1 in the country because we have unlimited in terms of the best coverage, most generous coverage for any state in the nation. After we do this reform, if we put $1 million cap or any cap on it in that kind of ballpark, we would still be number 1 in the nation.
Okay.
The next closest state is New York at $50,000. And everyone else below is lower than that. And so you do get a concern, but in many cases, if someone exceeded the cap, and that would be less than a fraction of 1% or less, is they have their normal health insurance, they have other medical insurance, that would be there to help kick in, or they have the court system. So again, this is that balancing act of tough issues, but the biggest thing is we reform those cost structures. One other thing that this would add is it would add better transparency to how those numbers are calculated. Because we'd leave the old fund and that would run down, but we'd create a much more transparent, open system for future costs. So if you lay those things together, this is a tough one emotionally for a lot of people, but when you look at the facts, I think there's a strong argument to say we need to do this reform because it's $125 per vehicle and still having good coverage for people.
And you've brought up the Accountable Health Care Act that actually there'll be a point where everybody will have health insurance, and that can help.
Well, that's why it tailors well.
Right.
Because that was my goal, is to say, 2014, people are going to have coverage, either through the exchange with individual health care insurance or Medicaid or some methodology. So that's where the timing's good, and that's much like we did the Blue Cross Blue Shield reform.
Right.
The old ways may have been good for the old days, but with these major other changes coming, they sort of all come together to say now there's a good environment to move forward with these reforms.
Yeah, it wasn't lost on me that there's kind of that perfect timing.
Yeah, we try to think of these things about
Well, many
We've
times
come together.
That's still what's kind of unique about your administration. You think of these things. Sometimes that has been the case in the past. We have a few minutes left. I was just wondering if I could just open it up to you, other things that you wanted to talk about, or what's on your mind, just to be respectful of your time.
Well, a couple things. One is we are going through the budget process, and there are a lot of important issues, so I encourage people to speak up to their legislators, because one of the big issues that your organization is a big supporter of, we're asking for a lot of early childhood resources. Mm-hmm. As a strategic investment. We have a waiting list of about 29,000 kids that it's need-based. They can't get preschool today. Over the next 2 years, we'd like to be able to say that waiting list has been eliminated, that these kids have the opportunity to go. The other ones are this transportation funding and Medicaid expansion in terms of covering people. And why is that important? Because I don't believe in just taking federal dollars. That's not the way government works. We're here to serve you as the customer. And if you step back and look at it, the point is right now the uncovered people are totally unmanaged. It's uncontrolled costs, and they're going to the emergency room for their medical care. Mm-hmm. Let's put them in a managed care system where they can have a primary care physician, they can get immunizations. It can be done through private plans, again, through our structures. In Michigan, we've got a great track record. Let's do it that way so we have a lower cost to society and a better benefit for all of us. And it would actually save the state dollar resources, and part of those savings I would set aside in case the federal government changed the rules, then we'd have a backup plan.
Right.
So I think we've thought through that one pretty well. So I encourage people to speak up. The other one is, the big topic I would share with you is this talent question. That I'd come back to that, and I'm going to keep on coming back to that, because that's a great strategic opportunity for Michigan, is to say the country doesn't do it well. And what do I mean by that? Right now, the private sector does individual company basis pretty good, but we don't really know the demand, say the banking industry has for talent, for now and for the longer term. Let's get the private sector to do that work with us as a partner. So that's collaborating with the private sector. Then we'll go to the creation side, which is the education sector, and get them talking and integrating better and working better together. Again, never telling anyone what to study, but understanding that connection to a career is critical, and who does the best job of connecting the supply and demand of talent is going to have a big advantage in terms of their economic future. And I think Michigan can be a leader in that. We can get a good lead for 10 or 20 years if we do it right over the next 2 or 3 years.
Those next few years, I think, are really critical to that. I would agree with you. And, getting back to the early childhood, I'll just briefly share with you a story. The most emotional time I've had since I've had this job. Our Grow Up Great program is in a number of schools, but we're not everywhere. And I had a mother of twins come up to me almost in tears because she had one twin in our program and one twin was not, and she couldn't understand why that was the case, and she loved the program so much, and it really brought it home for me. So I really, really would like businesses to think about making that investment. And that is an investment. It's a long-term investment, but it's one that just really pays great dividends. And I think without it, our future could be murky. So I really applaud you on the early childhood side as well. But,
thank you.
A lot of great things happening in the state. Again, this is the PNC Roundtable minus Paul W., and there's no such thing as the PNC Roundtable without Paul. He's out enjoying pure Michigan. Governor, I want to thank you for joining us. This is our 5th anniversary, and it's really special to have you.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, it's not quite my 33rd like my marriage, but hopefully we'll be doing a number of years. But again, I want to thank you for all the great work you're doing and your staff. And really, I must tell you, when I go to our headquarters in Pittsburgh, I'm proud to be able to set people straight and understand. They see the Moody's and the S&P upgrades, and everybody just thinks you're doing a fabulous job. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you.